Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, Emmanuel Macron, and Olaf Scholz, these are the people who we're told are our leaders. They make the big decisions, change the lives of millions with the stroke of a pen, and they're the people who we elected into office. But when you look a little bit closer, it quickly becomes apparent that they're not the ones who are really in control. In fact, they're nowhere near the most powerful people in the world. So then who are these people behind the shadows? Who really are the most powerful people in the world, running society behind the scenes? Well, to understand this, we're going to take a journey through modern society, uncovering the hidden mechanics of power and unmasking the people who are truly at the top of the pyramid. At the first level, we have elected officials, the leaders of the free world. These are the men and women who rise through the political ranks, take control of their party, and eventually the government entirely. They're the people on the ballot papers, the only part of the system we have a direct say over. But naturally, everything here isn't as it seems. When you consider the power that these people actually wield, it's incredibly limited. The way politicians are selected and pushed into the public eye plays a large role. Within political parties, the way they select their leaders isn't based on qualities you would necessarily want. To get ahead, first you need to join the selective club to begin with. It mostly involves being born into a rich family, going into the best private schools, and existing within their world to begin with. That gets any prospective politician's foot in the door. Next, they need to prove to people already within the party that they're going to easily assimilate into the group and conform. They need to say the right things, be a good puppet, shake the right hands, and generally just be a good sycophant. And once they're good and they've conformed enough in their chosen party, they can rise up the ranks and choose a faction within the political party itself. Eventually, by making enough promises and choosing the right friends, a politician can put themselves at the head of one of these factions and make a play for dominance. If it succeeds, they'll guarantee themselves a place in power, or at least a shot at contesting an election. But all of this training turns them into an instrument of their party. Their political allies are the ones who put them in this place and can also easily remove them if they get unhappy, which means that whatever they actually want to do is always constrained by what their party wants, and the party does what the people want. And the party is completely controlled by outside forces. These politicians will never actually be able to break through and make systematic changes because their own position and power is completely dependent on the stability of that same system. The other qualities they'll develop are the same as an actor or a showman. They need to be able to convince enough people that they're different, that they'll really make a change in the world. For many, Trump seemed to be like an outsider, someone who was going to clean the swamp, change the system, and bring back power to the people. And he was an exception. He was able to become the president almost entirely through his showmanship and charisma. But eventually Trump found out the truth. The kind of political power that presidents and prime ministers wield is even more limited than just the constraints of your own party. In the US, for example, a president can't make new laws without the approval of a wider government, or even declare a war. They can't oust their political opponents, they can't really dictate what the police or army do, or exert any direct control of one part of their government. Instead, their power is almost as limited as a figurehead. Outside of special cases like a war or a massive crisis, they can't make decisions on their own. They're also constantly ruling under the shadow of the next election. And so if they make themselves too unpopular, they'll lose the next election, or if they plan long term, they won't get the short term results that the public loves. Or if they try to change anything too dramatically, they'll just be abandoned by the party before it even happens. This is why these people are at the lowest level of our pyramid of power. Elected officials in real democracies, they represent the interests of their party, rather than themselves. They can't make large decisions without approval. They also occupy the only level of the power pyramid which is actually at the mercy of the masses. So what really drives these people? Other than their own party politics, it's money. And depressingly, politicians come rather cheap though compared to other business expenses. According to a leaked footage of a BlackRock employee, some senators are as cheap as $10,000. In fact, political lobbying is a $4 billion market in the US, which isn't actually that much money considering how effective it is. The opioid epidemic is just one example of how far these companies can take it. By paying off a few politicians and bureaucrats, Purdue Pharma got away with selling heroin in a pill for decades.
Purdue Pharma needed the FDA to approve. They'd spent $30 million developing this drug, but they were all in and they needed this drug, and to keep the company alive, they needed the FDA to approve it. And this guy was like, I can't approve this. This is heroin in a pill. They took him to a hotel on the East Coast. Purdue Pharma took Curtis Wright of the FDA, spent a couple of days in this hotel room. They came out of the hotel room with an approval, with the language, OxyContin, quote, is believed to be non-addictive. A year later, he leaves the FDA, where he's making probably 50 grand a year. Where does he go work? Purdue Pharma. Ugh. For $400,000+ a year.
And their aggressive marketing and lies were the beginning of the whole thing, and estimates for the total amount of deaths caused by the opioid epidemic range from 400 to 600,000. While regular criminals get locked up for life, the Sacklers, the family behind Purdue, got to keep their billions and their freedom. So if money is what drives these people and translates to political power, then it should be as simple as seeing who has the most money. And it's there that the true power lies. And so that would mean that people like Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos are the most powerful people in the world, right? Well, it's not just the money. The old saying is true, and knowledge is power. Well then, they are by far the most powerful. By pioneering and taking ownership of social media, tech billionaires have gained control over the way people communicate with each other, and what people find out about the world. By controlling the algorithms, they pick the presidents. But more than that, their companies make their profits through the information they gather about you. By analyzing every second you spend on one of their apps, they can build up a massive profile on what interests you, what your hobbies are, and all your other personal information. There aren't any limits. They can find out your health data, your location, your financial information, and they can even predict what you're gonna do next. Google often knows what women are pregnant before they even know, and starts targeting them with specific adverts.
Target's advanced advertising system even knew about a teenage girl's pregnancy before she could break the news to her own father. And he found out when the store sent her maternity deals in the mail.
So if knowledge is power, the answer seems pretty simple. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because to figure out the tech world's true place in the power structure, we need to look a little deeper. Knowledge isn't simply power. You need the ability to act on that knowledge and take advantage of it to benefit a tool. Instead, we can properly explain the relationship using the French philosopher Foucault and his idea of power knowledge. In the natural world, it's a simple truth that might makes right. The larger animals eat the smaller ones. The predators eat the prey, and it's clear who the top dog is. Power works this way in modern society as well, or at least to an extent. The government, which you can usually find in the largest, most imposing buildings in the capital, use their police and army to impose their laws. But ruling through brute strength isn't what keeps a society running. Ruling solely through violence inevitably leads to revolution, once your subjects sense weakness. If you want a long-lasting society, then you need people to police themselves. The modern state wants conformity above everything else, and to see how the state makes people conform, Foucault started in the school system. It's generally accepted that the school system's purpose is to give people the knowledge they need to get by in society, but this doesn't explain the rigid structures and doctrines that define them. Children don't learn any better if you make them wake up way too early, put them in ordered rows in classrooms, demasculated, and tracking their day in a tight schedule. Instead, these measures are put in place to train kids to work within the power structures of society. The routine mirrors the workday at a factory. In fact, this is where most school systems come from people like Andrew Carnegie, who pioneered this system by pouring untold millions into these schools. The schedule then trains them to segregate their lives into a timetable of work. The bell that rings for every period is just a version of the factory whistle. Kids are then rewarded with symbolic gestures for obedience, just like in the workplace. Each specific subject gets 1 hour a day at best, but every lesson teaches children conformity and to surrender to the system and get in the factory. This isn't necessarily a great evil. There will always be power dynamics and hierarchies. They're not going anywhere, they're throughout nature. A society full of unindoctrinated nonconformists would never function at all. But the system isn't just in place for the greater good of society, it furthers the desires of the powerful, much more than the children who are subject to it. So where's knowledge's place in all of this? Well, according to Foucault, within school and in wider society, knowledge is completely controlled by power. This is the essence of power knowledge. The fact that what's true is dictated by power. Powerful control was taught in the lessons, what the textbooks say and which aspects of the world are worth teaching people about. The news and the media, the algorithms control the knowledge. They decide whether something gets through or whether something is misinformation. And the most important part of power knowledge is how it relates to people. When people leave each level of school, they get turned into a piece of knowledge. You become an amalgamation of your exam results and your record of behavior. These are what determine your place and role within society. And if you're indoctrinated enough, they become part of your self-identity. The more detailed and extensive the system's knowledge of you is, the more easily it can control you. This is the role that tech billionaires play. They are the brokers of this knowledge, selling it to the rest of the powerful for a profit. Google and Meta's platforms are the next level in this. They can play on your desires and sell you the right products to keep you in the cycle of working and spending. They know what keeps you entertained in your off time, feeding you the right content to keep you docile and complacent. More than this, they control the ways people get information and build knowledge in the modern world. But as for the actual power within the pyramid, these tech billionaires aren't all that high up. They're new to the game, and they're still at the mercy of more powerful institutions and people. They don't have the legitimacy and reputation that people higher up in the power structure have. They can't change the nature of society they live in. The only thing they have going for them is their ludicrous wealth. But even this is somewhat of an illusion. There's people that are far more wealthy than the tech billionaires, but don't just take it from me, they'll readily admit it.
Being at a net worth of 230 billion roughly, being perceived as the richest person on earth.
Well, I think Putin is significantly richer than me.
You really do, yeah?
Yeah.
But money is only as good as what you can use it for. When combined with political power though, it can achieve almost anything. And Putin has both, but his actual net worth is pretty much immeasurable. It's doubtful there's really a line or a clear distinction between his wealth and Russia's. People point to his luxury villas, yachts and other symbols of wealth to try and get an answer, but they represent a small percentage of Russia's GDP that he siphoned off for his own comfort. What he really owns is Russia itself, and the 20% of the world's natural gas and oil production that comes with it. I mean, Russia's revenue from the export of fossil fuels was 700 million euros every single day of December of 2022. This is down around 300 million from before the new Western sanctions, and Putin has been in complete control of the system for 2 decades, so who knows how much he's actually taken? You would never know. And it's a system that's been designed by Putin himself to give him and his collection of cronies nearly all of the wealth. The bottom 99.8% of Russia's population have less wealth than Putin and his 500 richest oligarchs together. And so you can be sure that he's richer than Musk or Zuckerberg. But Putin doesn't just have power over his massive fortune, he's got the power to direct one of the largest and most powerful countries in the world, and his grip on the country has never been stronger. Dreams of Western sanctions putting an end to his regime, or at least the war, have completely fallen apart. Historically, economic concerns rarely, if ever, stop a war from happening, and it has to get pretty dire before they end a war. There's countless examples of countries making bread out of sawdust or not making enough food at all before they capitulated. And in this war of attrition, Russia is in by far the most comfortable spot. Ukraine's national debt is now projected to rise to 95% of their GDP by 2024. Russia's national debt is around 20% of their GDP in comparison. Nothing shakes up an economy like war. It sets off a chain reaction that eats into everyone's bottom line. Prices go up, stocks get shaky, and no matter who prevails, it could be years before some countries get back to normal. Millions could face food or energy insecurity this winter due to the invasion of Ukraine, and all over the world, what's left of the upper middle class is struggling to make ends meet. The uncertainty is shaking up global markets. In the last 3 quarters, Warren Buffett's dumped over $33 billion in stocks. But you don't have to subject yourself to this volatility. Even today, thousands of you guys have been seeking that opportunity for yourselves, with today's sponsor, Masterworks. Masterworks recently extended its streak of positive returns, selling a Cicely Brown piece for a 77% net annualized return. That's 16 straight. Masterworks has over $800 million in assets under management and over 800,000 users on the platform, and they're making headlines after launching their largest offering yet, a $36 million Basquiat offering. Paintings have sold out within minutes, and you can still skip the waitlist and get started straight away. Just click the link in the description. The ill-conceived coup by Prakashan and Wagner has now been dealt with. Their armies have scattered, their leaders dead. Now, if NATO really does get super involved here, they may have a slight chance of losing, but it probably wouldn't spell the end for Putin even if they did. His government isn't weak like the Tsarist government toppled by the First World War, or the Soviet system in their blunder in Afghanistan. Putin has masterminded a model for modern dictatorships, one that's both far more efficient at extracting wealth and keeping the people happy. And here's how he did it. We talked earlier about Foucault's idea that power dictates knowledge and therefore truth, and modern Russia is a perfect example. Putin has changed the fabric of Russian society to shape the truth into whatever he wants it to be. Dictatorships use the same tools that societies in general use to breed conformity and docility in their people. The same principles of what's happening in the school system and throughout society apply to dictatorships as well. The difference there is in the ideology that's being taught. By controlling the knowledge that people are taught and the information that gets disseminated within society allows dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping to change how people view the world. And it's usually not a hard task either, as the chaos that you need for a dictator to take power often means people have been living in fear for years. And so when someone does come in and restore stability and prosperity, at least for some of the people, it isn't even a lie anymore. It's a sad truth that successful dictators are often far more effective at making a country wealthier or more powerful than democracies. Rwanda's dictator, Paul Kagame, turned a war-torn nation into one of the most powerful in the region, and now it's one of the most successful states in Africa. It doesn't matter to most that press freedoms have been rolled back or some political opponents have been imprisoned. Benefits for the people outweigh the negatives. Meanwhile, dictators keep a version of the things they destroy to keep the illusion going. There's still vigorous debate in the media, it's just centered on issues within the framework of the ideology. People can still violently disagree with each other on TV. In fact, it helps give a sense of legitimacy. The only constraint is that the assumed common ground for the debate matches the ideology. Coke and Pepsi want people to argue about which one's better, so long as people keep making one of two choices. Talking heads on Russian TV can discuss how the war is being fought, just not whether it should be fought in the first place. Even without the widespread approval of the people, modern world dictatorships have a wealth of tools available to keep people loyal. And Foucault predicted the system in his work on the Panopticon. But he didn't invent the Panopticon. The idea was first put to paper by the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham. He conceived of a prison where 4 blocks of cells are arranged around a central tower with a 360-degree view. Prisoners looking up at the tower can't see inside, but they know that whoever's in the tower can see them, meaning that at any moment, a guard could be watching their every move. This potential is enough to maintain a sense that you're always being watched, that the system sees all, and if you're always being watched, you're far less likely to break the rules or act outside of the constraints of the system. Theoretically, there could be absolutely no one in the tower most of the time, but that doesn't matter. The people will discipline and control themselves out of fear. So who could possibly have more power than Putin, Xi Jinping, or King Jong-un? Just like the leaders of democracies, dictators are also constrained in their own way. In fact, they're even more dependent on their cronies and their inner circle. You see, despite all their power on the surface, dictators are always at the mercy of their subordinates. While they lack in accountability to the people, they make up for their responsibilities to very powerful people. First, you need their support to take power in the first place. Without certain promises to show you can serve them better than the current administration, nothing actually happens. Successful dictators are constantly spinning plates, keeping their interests balanced, and everyone happy enough. This responsibility keeps their power constrained. Dictators can only act in the interests of these oligarchs. Anything outside of that will lead to plots, coups, and a change in leadership. For some dictators, these restrictions aren't as limiting. Countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia, and other petrostates have a much easier time. It's as simple as extracting the resources than extracting the profits. The revenue then comes from a few heavily controlled industries within a few barons in control of all of it. The will of the people loses its relevance, because most of them have no control whatsoever over these key industries. And other oligarchs in other industries lose their leverage, as their industries contribute less to the overall economy. This all gives more power to the oil industry, whatever industry is most dominant, and the entire country's government revolves around it and exists to keep it going. Putin's oligarchs must have thought that they would make more money funding the war machine than they would lose through sanctions, and it isn't clear that they were wrong. But the one thing a dictatorship lacks most is legitimacy, not to its own people, but from a global perspective, as their power ends at their borders, or however far their soldiers can get past their borders. Outside of their own personal kingdoms, dictators lose their leverage. People outside of their societies don't get the full indoctrination outside of what troll farms can accomplish. They don't get to cover up their crimes with ideology and media silence in quite the same way. And what's more is that these modern petrostates are running out of time. Oil won't be this important forever. Renewables and nuclear energy have far more potential for innovation, and the worlds will run dry eventually. Current estimates of how much we've got left if we don't find new untapped reservoirs put the time span at around 50 years. But what these states do have is money. The Saudis in particular have been throwing billions at sports, for example. Ronaldo's new contract to play for a Saudi side is worth over $220 million.
Tô muito empolgado, muito feliz, né, de estar indo para uma liga nova, uma nova experiência, um novo desafio. E obviamente que estou empolgado para fazer história lá. Desafio novo, né? Cristiano Ronaldo acho que foi o pioneiro em tudo isso. E todo mundo no começo chamou ele de louco, né, disso e de aquilo. E hoje você está vendo que a liga está crescendo, né, cada vez mais.
People like Neymar and Messi get paid untold millions just for Instagram posts, all expenses included. The Saudis also own Premier League winners Man City since 2008, and they've pretty much bought the entire sport of golf when they bought out the PGA Tour and merged it into their own competition, which is why most media sources say this is all meant to convince us to forget about their human rights violations, or the repression, or the fact that they're a dictatorship. And while that might be partially true, it fails to see the bigger picture. Saudi Arabia are trying to buy sports themselves. They're not looking for some sort of proxy loyalty from regular people. They want a seat at the real table of power, the cultural power. They want to control an industry that won't dry up in 50 years' time, or get replaced before that even happens. So they've turned to an industry where money is all that matters, among many other industries they're investing in right now. Real estate, businesses around the world, media companies like Vice, and of course sports. Whether this will work is a whole other question. But then who's really at the top of the pyramid of power here? While the Saudis understand that true power lies not within money, but with the control over the industries that create it. These are the people who are truly at the top of the pyramid, the leaders of industries. They're not any one group of people, they exist in a class and a world of their own. They own the factories, the offices, and the entire economy. They've owned it and controlled it for hundreds of years. Politicians and dictators come and go, but the industrial, banking, corporate elite always remain in their positions. A whole society can change and they'll always stay in power. Germany's government got ripped out root and stem after World War II, and yet the Rothschilds, Ferdinand Porsche, and his company Volkswagen always survived. Krupp still lived on despite giving Germany its war machine. They're not limited by borders or countries or allegiances, they play both sides. The Rothschilds got taken down by the Nazis and then reappeared controlling spies across the world. These people don't pay taxes, their money sits in offshore accounts and fake charities. Loopholes are kept open and laws aren't enforced because they write the laws. Lobbying gives them everything they want. They might not be able to invade countries, but why would they need to? One phone call and any world leader is at their beck and call. Plus, all of their motivations are roughly the same, to keep the status quo. They're the ones who created the system we live in today, the modern school systems, all funded and started by Carnegie and other wealthy industrialists. The data that they need comes from the tech companies, which they have majority investments in across the board, keeping their entire industry afloat with their advertising money. These are the people who take the most profits as well, the people who write the tax laws, the people you don't see on TV. The very upper levels of the power structure are occupied by the banks and their owners.
We say we have a commander-in-chief, but really the commander-in-chief is Larry Fink today. The guy running BlackRock is really the president of the United States, if we look at the kind of influence he's got.
They're the ones who own parts of the other business magnates and their empires. They use their ownership stakes to influence politicians to play games with the financial system, often causing suffering for whoever has to deal with the consequences. People like George Soros famously used his riches in a gamble to short the pound in the early 90s. The UK had made a deal pegging the value of the pound to the euro, although Soros suspected it was actually worth far less, and so by buying billions of euros with pounds at the high exchange rate, he triggered a massive devaluing of the currency, making him over £1 billion, but leaving the British people over £3 billion poorer. Nowadays he sticks to political tampering, pouring hundreds of millions into various democratic groups. I mean, just recently he funneled over $140 million through a non-profit into the Democrats, on top of $170 million coming from his own accounts. BlackRock and Vanguard have pioneered a new method of turning money into power. As asset managers, they offer companies and regular people a chance to invest in a whole range of different funds and industries. The catch is, they choose which companies get the money, and their investments amount to ownership stakes in the companies they choose, giving them huge influence across the board, which they're using to push their own economic and political agenda. BlackRock controls over $9 trillion in assets invested in around 18,000 companies across the globe. And the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink's recent letter to CEOs makes clear the endgame, writing that the pandemic, the economic crisis, and all other problems for the world have made people far less trusting of institutions. He's not wrong, but his conclusion is far more worrying, as Fink states rather hopefully that, quote, employees are increasingly looking to their employer as the most trusted, competent, and ethical source of information, more so than government, the media, and NGOs. And I'm not sure who trusts a CEO more than a charity, but it reflects how the power has been shifting towards corporations and businesses for quite some time. And if you own all of these businesses by owning the money, you then control the narrative and people trust you the most. This is why these people own the government, they own the media, they're privatizing every part of your life, monetizing your soul. The only thing they don't own is the respect and allegiances of the people. Yet they do control the culture. They're at the very top of the power structure that makes up society. They determine the habitus, the cultural values of where you live. And so that makes them the only people more powerful than dictators, technocrats, and politicians. Below that is the rest of us, with little to no hope of upward movement. However, one of their only weaknesses is how bad they are at keeping their decadence and their obscene private lives away from the public eye. People are starting to call them out. Their ESG scores are being scrutinized everywhere online. And if you check out our video on the most depraved crimes of the ultra rich, you can see just what they've been doing in their free time with all of this power. And if you're interested in discussing these things with like-minded people and myself, where you can connect with a small tribe of us, make sure to check out my community in the description below. On YouTube, I've already discussed many of the challenges that we will face, like loneliness, meaninglessness, and the pitfalls of modernity. And having gone through all of these problems myself, I have personally used the best philosophers, psychologists, and sociologists to overcome all of this, and build the channel that you're watching today. However, the video format here does have some limitations, as I've always wanted a more personal connection with my audience, where we can have deeper discussions where I can know you by name, and we get to really know each other as people, which is why I have launched the Moon School of Living, which isn't just another online community. It's hosted on School, free from trolls, shitposts, and any other garbage. It's a premium environment, with high value members, where you can expect at least 3 weekly calls, where we discuss topics like modernity, philosophy, and how I make these YouTube videos, where all sessions are recorded for later access. We've also got a course on video editing and upcoming ones on modernity, philosophy, YouTube, money, and so many more, where you'll be a part of a close-knit community of us where we connect with like-minded people, away from our broken habitus. We've already had some great calls on this whole power structure thing, ayahuasca, internet addiction, and personalized YouTube reviews where I literally go over aspiring YouTube creators, giving them one-to-one advice. It's $99 a month, and I know this is expensive, but it ensures a high-quality experience for serious learners in a much smaller community for all of us. If you're skeptical or find it too pricey at the moment, just continue enjoying my regular content and please don't worry about this. But if you feel the community is for you, there's a 7-day refund and cancelling is hassle-free. So if my content's resonated with you and you've enjoyed this video, imagine being part of a tight-knit community of us, where I personally know you and celebrate your progress. If you're interested, just check the link in the description below.